Hello and welcome, groovy sound searchers, to the Old Newspaper Plus podcast. I'm Courtney Lorraine, bringing you the old news. In this first episode, we are going back 100 years. That's right, everybody, to the roaring 1920s. And we're starting off in the world of water sports with a family that gained worldwide fame, and it all started in sunny Miami, Florida, USA. These first articles were originally published in the Miami Herald of Miami, Florida on November 12th, 1921. St. John's water polo team beats All-Stars. The Casino St. John water polo team yesterday afternoon defeated the Hardy's All-Stars 4-0 in the first water polo game since the summer contest at the Roman Pools. The Hardy team put up a spirited game, coming into the shadow of their opponent's goal several times, but the clever work of the St. John's goalkeeper prevented them from scoring. Individual honors went to the captains of the teams, Newton Loomis of the Casino St. John and Lewis Moore of the All-Stars. Alexander Ott refereed the game. Aquatic stunts entertain crowd. Ott improvises speedy program for big Armistice Day crowd at the Casino St. John. Spectacular feats and comedy stunts vied with each other to entertain the crowd at the Casino St. John Friday afternoon, when an impromptu water sports program was offered. Half an hour had sufficed for Alexander Ott to make hasty preparations, when it was noticed that a large crowd would appreciate the water sports in addition to the water polo game. Ed Rumpf Jr. was the winner of the greased pole event. To the end of the pole that extended over the South Roman pool, an American flag was attached. Several girls joined the boys in the attempt. Some ran, some balanced cautiously, but all suffered the fate of being forced to dive before they could snatch the mark of victory, until Ed Rumpf Jr. made the sliding run, clutched the flag as he made his last sliding lunge forward, and plunged with it into the pool. Many attempts with backward falls were full of laughter-producing qualities. A human fish caught. After the water polo event, Ralph E. Racy as the fisherman and Charlie Cutler as the fish gave a comedy that might be entitled A Human Fish. Cutler was given a handicap of 40 feet, while Racy was allowed 10 minutes in which to reel in his prey. The line was attached to Cutler's harness, and he plunged into the pool. After a minute had passed, Cutler was noticed by desperate efforts to be holding his own. After 2 minutes, however, he was beginning to show weariness from the strenuous efforts he was making. "What's the time?" gasped the tired fish. 2 minutes gone," responded the timekeeper, and the fish, though still game, looked dismayed. In 3 minutes and 20 seconds, the 235-pound fish was landed. "Some whale!" called an onlooker, surveying Racy's prize. Swims underwater. The next feat was performed by Earl Moore, who had just performed in the polo contest. He swam underwater the entire length of the pool, gaining the opposite side in 48 seconds. His performance attracted generous applause. Canoe tilting came next into the limelight. Miss Ruth Follett and Miss Margaret Rogers were opponents for the first contest. It was Miss Follett's first attempt at the sport. The winner had to overthrow her opponent 2 out of 3 times. Miss Rogers won the tilt twice in succession, showing ease and skill. Then, the Hardys opposed the Casino St. John, won easily 2 times in succession. A diving exhibition crowned the afternoon's performances, with Dewey Cannon and Newton Loomis showing the skill that made them 2 of the South's best divers. Half twists, back dives, 1.5 back dives, 1.5 cutaways, back 1.5 with a twist, front 1.5 with a half twist, and double back were just some of the dives that drew cries of admiration from the spectators. Dives from the tower by Loomis and Cannon and a graceful swan dive by Harold Ross were the finishing touches to their diving. Then, a little maiden heralded as Little Anne showed her lack of fear and her ability by a dive from the tower as the last feat for the afternoon. Dives blazing into the pool from tower. Ott makes suicide leap during intermission at the American Legion Hall at the Casino St. John. Outlined against a black knight in a cloak of fire, Alexander stood for 15 seconds on top of the tower, then plunged, a flaming figure, 50 feet into the pool below, while crowds jamming the sides of the Roman pools stood in silence. He took his suicide leap at 10:30 p.m. during the intermission at the American Legion's Armistice Day dance. Ott climbed to the top of the tower carrying his cloak of cotton and a gallon and a half of gasoline. On the summit, he took on the appearance of this tall specter. Then, when he gathered his white cloak about him, then his wife climbed to the top of the tower with a torch and applied flames to Ott's cloak, while the crowd below became silent in expectation. As Ott made the dive, his face could be seen darkly outlined in his glowing coat. The dive was a sensational climax to the Armistice Day and went over big. Ott received nothing in way of compensation for his feat in which he risked his life. After the dive came the grand march of strains of The Stars and Stripes Forever. The Casino St. John at once became a lively scene with 600 dancers on the floor, wearing paper caps and throwing gay-colored confetti and streamers. I know I threw out a lot of names in that first couple of articles, but the ones that everybody needs to focus on for this episode are the Ott family. I do want to give a couple of side notes, though, about the location. The Roman pools is how I will always reference this location, even though in these articles it was called the Casino St. John. The name of these pools changed multiple times throughout the year, but the Roman pools is what they were most popularly known as. I'm not sure how long these pools were, so I can't give you that. However, I can tell you that the pools were both 7 feet deep and were fed salt water straight from the ocean by a windmill that stood at the east end of the pools. I do have pictures of these pools with people in them, so I will post that on social media so everyone gets an idea of how impressive that 48-second underwater swim really was. However, I'm sure you can all deduce that if they can have canoe tilting contests safely in the pools, they're probably pretty big pools. And those first articles were just a baby glimpse into the lives of this internationally famed water sports family led by one Mr. Alexander Ott. And we're starting off with Mr. Alexander. Let's jump off with some background on him, the man that frequently incorporated the element of fire into his world-renowned water sports shows, and who played a significant role in bringing attention to the Miami area of Florida, back when they were just getting all started. He was born August 4th, 1888, in Manhattan, New York. His parents were Mr. Albert and Miss Ellis Ott, who came to America from Switzerland around 1883. He only had one older brother, also named Albert after their father. He and his brother grew up in New York. I stress this little detail because there's articles that say differently. Just know, I researched this family extensively, and what I'm telling you is the facts. As a young man, Alexander served in the U.S. Naval National Guard as a sailor on training ships. After that, he was a diver for the U.S. Olympic swim team. He, at one point, was even president of a committee of lifeguards in a tri-county area in New York. And eventually, Alexander would grow to be one of the biggest names in water sports and live entertainment in the entire nation, even making it onto the silver screen. Alexander first officially moved to Florida sometime in 1912, and he would, however, alternate living in Florida and New York. Those moves were always based on the seasons and where it would be most suitable to put on the water sports programs. It was while living in Florida that he met and fell head over heels for his beloved wife, Grace, but I'm going to get to her in just a moment. Alexander first dipped his toes in the water metaphorically speaking, of course, working at the pools of the Royal Palm Hotel and Resort in Florida. It wasn't long before he started working his way up the chain there and eventually became the manager of the pools. This is where and when he coordinated and hosted his very first Sunday afternoon water follies, which was something that they called the water sports shows back then. They also called them water carnivals, and a couple of different names, but I'm always going to personally reference them as the water sports programs. Just a heads up. Also, in that first article, there's mention of a tower. This was literally a diving tower that was 50 feet tall. They had another one on the other Roman pool right next to it. There were two pools identical to each other. One had the 50-foot tower and another one had, I think, a 30-foot tower. Know that the one referenced in the first articles was the 50-foot tower. But moving back on with Alexander. A couple years after he got started, he went on to manage the Biltmore Swimming Casino in Miami, Florida, better known as the Miami Biltmore, which I do plan to cover that location in a future episode because it's very fascinating, but not today. Alexander also managed the pools for the Venetian Swimming Casino in Coral Gables, Florida. This was all during the early 1920s. But like I said, he did come back and manage these areas multiple times throughout the 20s and 30s. In 1925, Alexander and his little family made a very highly publicized move from Miami to the Catskills Mountains of New York, where Alexander began managing the pools for the Rexmere Swimming Casino for the Stamford Resort in Catskills. That part of the resort, fun little fact, was actually turned into a youth center in 1965 and unfortunately burned down in March of 2014. But that's beside the point. I just thought it was interesting. Alexander and his wife actually started the tradition of annual beauty contests as well at these resorts where they managed, including the one in the Stamford of Catskills, and two of Florida's biggest beauty contests throughout time, the Miss Miami and the Miss Florida. Swimming a little forward in time, though, in the days of his famous water shows when they were reaching out all across the globe, Alexander was a master at finding new stunts and records and acts to incorporate in the lineups of his shows. He himself would often also perform and liked to incorporate fire, like I previously mentioned from that first article. Alexander eventually retired from the water show business, and when he did, he bought a charter fishing boat and started his own charter fishing business that he personally ran for over a decade. And it was during this time that he actually made it into Ripley's Believe It or Not records as the man who caught the most sharks on one line, one bait with one hook. That's because he caught a pregnant shark. Fun little fact, though. And it was during his charter fishing boat days that he gained the title of Captain Ott, which is how most people in Miami knew him when he passed away. And he and his beloved, gorgeous wife, Grace, were married until, also, he passed away in December of 1970. Which, by the way, if anybody is interested, is 53 years of marriage. A quick little side note about the water shows, just so everybody can grasp how much of a big deal these really were. Because entertainment, I don't think was all that easy to find back in the day. 100 years ago, they didn't have, internet or normal things like we're used to today, obviously. So anyways, these water shows would draw in crowds of hundreds and sometimes even thousands of people. And they weren't just local people either. People came from all around the nation. We're talking Hollywood royalty, foreign diplomats, yes, from other countries, knew about the shows and would travel all the way here just to see Alexander's water sports programs. Also, these shows tended to draw in more infamous people like gangsters of the roaring 1920s. Al Capone being one of them, he actually knew the Otts personally and loved to come to Miami just to stay at the Miami Biltmore so that he could be a part of all the festivities and watch all the shows. And also, another side note, the articles reference these places as swimming casinos. However, the papers did make it a point to mention that there was never gambling there. I don't believe that personally. If there were, gangsters and prohibition, and I can imagine it was a very exciting scene. Anyways, now I'm going to wade through the shallow amount of information I was able to collect on Grace. Because even though she was a very integral part of the family and was very important to their collective fame, because she was a woman, unfortunately, back 100 years ago, news reporters thought it was more important to report on men. But we're not getting into any kind of issues like that. I just want to let you know there's not a lot to read about her in the papers. All this I found on my own. So without further ado, let me introduce Miss Grace Ott. She was born Grace Sutton on November 1st, 1896 in Coles County, Illinois, USA. She had one older sister, Pearl, at the time, and they were both born to Miss Lorna Sutton, aka maiden name Swinford, and Mr. John Lincoln Sutton. I emphasized on the mom's maiden name because unfortunately Grace's parents divorced when she was very young. I'm not sure about the parenting plan that they had set up, but I can tell you that in the year 1900, Grace being age about 4, she and her sister lived with their mom in Illinois, and by 1910 Grace and her sister lived with their dad, John, in Seattle, Washington. It was around, it was about when Grace was 16 or 17 when she finally moved out on her own and went to Miami in pursuit of a career in diving and swimming. In her life, she actually claimed to be the first professional female diver to come to Miami, Florida. It was in 1916, when Grace was about 20, that she met and fell in love with Mr. Alexander Ott. The two of them were married March 6, 1917, in Duval County, Florida. Around that time, for some reason, they moved to Denver, Colorado. I couldn't find any reasoning behind that, and I don't believe they did water shows in Denver. I might be a little wrong. I didn't check the Denver papers, to be honest. Sorry, guys. Honestly, though, it doesn't matter. So it was in Denver, Colorado, however, in 1918 that they welcomed into the world their literally, quote unquote, perfect baby boy. And by 1922, the family was back in Miami, making their way into all the papers and eventually onto the movie screens. They were heralded as the Miami Marvel family and a bunch of other things, but that was just one of my favorites. Now, for the moment you've all actually been waiting for, now that we have all the personal information done, let's cannonball into some of these old newspapers. I hope y'all like my word puns, by the way. I don't mind being a little cheesy. This next article is kind of short and it ends a little tragically, but it really speaks volumes of the kind of person that Alexander really just was naturally. He didn't have to do this, but he chose to. So let's get into it. This article was originally published in the New York Times of New York, New York, July 3rd, 1916. Dies after attack by fish. C.E. Van Zandt had been bitten while swimming at Beach Haven. Special to the New York Times. Beach Haven, New Jersey, July 2nd. Charles Epting Van Zandt of Philadelphia, who was badly bitten in the surf here on Saturday afternoon by a fish, presumably a shark, died late last night. He was less than 50 feet from the beach and was swimming in when those on the shore saw a fin of a fish coming rapidly toward him. They called to him to hurry and yelled warning at him, but before he could swim many feet, the fish closed with him. Van Zandt shouted for help and then went under. Alexander Ott, a professional expert swimmer and member of the American Olympic swimming team, dashed to his assistance, but arrived too late to prevent him from being bitten. After a struggle, Ott brought him ashore. Mr. Van Zandt was the son of Mr. and Mrs. Eugene L. Van Zandt. He was in his 25th year. He was a graduate of the Department of Fine Arts of the University of Pennsylvania. It is said that large sharks have been recently seen a few miles out. This next article was originally published in the Kingston Daily Freeman of Kingston, New York, July 15th, 1925. Alexander was about 37 years old, and this next article This next article explains an act that Alexander also used many times throughout the years in his water sports programs, and it was introduced to him by some good old-fashioned colleagues. Swimming at Stanford Pool. Stanford in the Catskills, New York, July 15. Stanford summer swimming season got fully underway on Saturday afternoon when an immense crowd watched a most entertaining water sports program at the Rexmere Swimming Casino. The program, very varied in its nature, delighted everyone present. The program was opened by Alexander Ott attempting to break the world record of 5 minutes and 3 seconds staying underwater, which was established by Jean McClure, who is in charge of the Royal Palm Hotel Swimming Casino in Miami, Florida, but who established his world record at the Venetian Swimming Casino in Coral Gables this past winter, where Alexander Ott was manager. Mr. Ott dived off the official timekeepers, with sounding poles, beat on the bottom of the pool every 30 seconds as to inform Mr. Ott the length of time he remained underwater. Mr. Ott, who has been suffering from a slight cold this past week, found it too difficult a job to remain under more than 4 minutes and 12 seconds. This length of time is one that is very rarely equaled, and the performer received a very hearty round of applause when he arose to the surface. Following this event, there were 40-yard races, diving contests for iron rings, and fancy diving contests. A fun little fact, just on the side, about that record: Alexander did eventually beat it, and actually beat it multiple times. So, back to the articles. This next one was originally published in the Miami News of Miami, Florida, on February 13th, 1938. Alexander was about 49 at this time, and the Ott water shows at this point were world-renowned. I know I keep mentioning that, but just know that by this time, everybody knew about it. Everybody was interested in it. Alexander's colleagues, like I mentioned, liked to bring him shows and acts to introduce into his water sports programs. And this next article is another example of that. Biltmore features Human Fishing Act. Expert swimmer and fisherman to stage battle. Fishing the human fish will be the most unusual attraction on Alexander Ott's Miami Biltmore 25-act water show this afternoon. The program begins at 3 p.m. The fisherman will be Alexander Ott himself, and the fish an expert swimmer. This is a real battle between angler and swimmer. Other feature attractions on the program are Bob Bobby and King Bud in Stepping in Society, the Radke Sisters, a trio of youngsters in acrobatic stunts, rhythm swimming by the Biltmore Mermaids, Marshall Wayne, Olympic high diving champion, with Sam Howard and Tony Zukas, spectacular acrobatic divers, and the Womandi dancing and other stunts on the high wire. Yes, I said acrobats and high wire and Biltmore Mermaids. Yeah, these are just little things that were a part of all these water shows. So, this next article was originally published in the Miami News of Miami, Florida, on May 21st, 1939, when Alexander was 50. And this is another move from Florida to New York that was highly publicized in both states. Like I said, they moved a lot, but only a few times was it like blown up in all of the papers. So, without further ado. Swanky Jones Beach to get Miami's famed water shows. Alexander Ott opens aquatic spectacle in Long Island, July 2nd. Miami's world-famous water carnivals with Alexander Ott has been producing at the Miami Biltmore pools with winter regularity for the last decade or more. This summer will unfold its wonders and thrills before upwards of 500,000 persons in the palatial aquatic amphitheater at Swanky Jones Beach in Long Island. Jones Beach, a part of a 75-acre state-operated park, is one of the largest summer play spots in the nation. Ott, who has been resting in his home at Miami Beach since the closing of the Miami Biltmore water shows in March, just signed a contract transferring the Miami spectacle to the spacious Long Island resort. The opening show is slated for July 2nd and the final for Labor Day. 3 shows are scheduled weekly, and the aquatic amphitheater with seats upward of 25,000 persons. Since many of the performers are Floridians, either by birth or adoption, who have gained worldwide fame in the exhibition in New York, will do much to advertise Florida, Miami in particular, Ott pointed out last night. Quote, "But we'll have a great show anyways, because we're going to bring on some outstanding new performers to take their places. There'll be Samaika, the sensational Egyptian diver, for instance. He's created a sensation wherever he's appeared, and I'm sure Long Island audiences will like him, and Florida audiences too, because we're planning to bring him to the Miami Biltmore pools next winter. Another outstanding performer who will appear at Jones Beach and who will return to Florida next winter is Dutch Harold Smith, member of the U.S. Olympic swim team, whose diving is first water variety." End quote. The veteran showman declared. Ott will leave for Jones Beach next week to get plans in shape for the July 2nd opening. He will produce smaller summer shows at Lake Mohawk in New Jersey. All right, this is next and final article for this episode, because I'm trying to keep it kind of short for everybody because this is my first episode. So, this article was originally published in the Miami Herald of Miami, Florida on December 14th, 1970. This is one of my favorite articles about Alexander personally, because it mentions a little bit more of his charter fishing days, and I wasn't able to find any information about that time of his life in very many of the papers. By the way, I want to mention that some of the info in this article is a little bit off. Like I mentioned before at the beginning, that happened back then. I'm not responsible for inaccurate information that was written by reporters over 100 years ago, guys, or over 50 years ago at that. But let's get into it. Alexander Ott, aquatic showman. Alexander Ott, producer and master of ceremonies of beauty pageants and Sunday afternoon water extravaganzas, a charter fishing boat captain for nearly 20 years, and a pioneer Miamian, died Sunday at St. Francis Hospital in Miami Beach. He was 82. Born and raised in New York City, Mr. Ott lived a short while in Denver before moving to Miami in 1912. Mr. Ott, during his early years in Miami, was a locker boy at the Royal Palm Hotel pool and was a construction worker at the James Deering Estate in Vizcaya. He eventually worked his way up to the Royal Palm, and now the site of the DuPont Plaza, and was put in charge of the pools. In 1923, Mr. Ott staged his very first Sunday afternoon water shows. At the shows, Mr. Ott would act as master of ceremonies, while swimmers such as Johnny Weissmuller and the performers such as Walinda tightrope walkers displayed their skills. Clowns would perform trick dives before as many as 4,500 spectators each week. Mr. Ott also performed in his own shows. In one routine, he would hold his breath underwater for as long as 5 minutes at a time. He once had to be pulled out of the water and revived. Mr. Ott will also perform such dangerous feats as diving into a pool of gas-covered flaming water and setting his special swimsuit on fire before plunging into the water. In 1928, Mr. Ott took over the pool at the Miami Biltmore in Coral Gables and conducted shows there until they closed in 1942. Annually, Mr. Ott produced huge beauty extravaganzas at the pools. They included the Miss Miami and the Miss Florida competitions. Countless newsreels were made of the water shows and beauty competitions and shown in movie theaters throughout the nation. While at the Biltmore, Mr. Ott lived in a suite of rooms with his wife Grace and son Jack, a one-time performer in his father's productions. Jack Ott has been made supervisor of 8 city swimming pools for nearly 20 years in Miami. In 1942, Mr. Ott bought a boat, began a charter fishing service, and became known as Captain Ott. Captain Ott was known throughout the world for his fishing feats. He is said to have reeled in more than 1,000 sharks. Commentator Lowell Thomas produced 5 films about Captain Ott and his fishing exploits. Captain Ott was once featured in Ripley's Believe It or Not as the only man to catch 26 sharks on the same hook, line, and piece of bait. He achieved this by catching a female shark carrying 25 baby sharks. In 1960, Mr. Ott sold his fishing boats, all of which were named Shark, and he retired. He is survived by his wife and son and 5 grandchildren. All right. Now, if you ask me, that's one very impressive obituary. So that, dear listeners, brings us to the end of the articles for this episode, but not to the end of this incredible family. Next episode, I'm going to focus solely on Jackie Ott, the amazing Aquatot, also known as the Grace and Alexander's only son. Only child at that. Before I get off, though, I do want to mention some of my sources and how to find my podcast on social media, which is where I'm going to post any pictures that I've got, and you guys can see what this guy looked like and the pools, and yeah, so hopefully you guys enjoy that. But for now, I wanted to mention my sources. I pay personally for a lot of subscriptions to research all of this stuff. I am not in any way advertising for these websites or companies. I simply want to make it known where this information is all available online at your fingertips if you so specifically choose to look. First off, I've got newspapers.com, which does offer some limited search results for free, but the good stuff you gotta pay to get off of there. Ancestry.com, you have to pay a subscription for that. You can do a 14-day free trial, but like I said, I'm not trying to plug for these sites. They're just awesome, and I want you guys to know where you can go to check it out. Findagrave.com. This one was awesome. Didn't know about this site, and it's free to use. Everybody should check that out. I also want to give a special notice to the website for the Stamford Village Library of New York, which is free to search through, and they also have a Facebook page, and you can find the blog post about Alexander Ott, where I got some of my earliest information about him. And I will link all of these on social media, by the way, so you guys can just go there and click it. Also wanted to give a special shout for the Miami Design Preservation League website, which offers some really cool pictures and info, and it's free to use. Also, my pictures that I will post, some of them came from the website for Coral Gables, and you got to kind of search, you got to Google history of Coral Gables, and their city website will come up. Same with the city of Miami. The Miami Memory, I think, is where some of my best pictures are coming from. So everybody just go check all that out. And if you want to follow me, you can find me on Instagram. Search the_old_newspaper_plus. The word spelt out all the way, including the word plus, Plus. You can find me on Facebook at The Old Newspaper Plus. No spaces, all words spelt out. And if you have any old newspaper article suggestions, or maybe some old papers yourself, and you'd like to share them with me, you can email me at, you guessed it, theoldnewspaperplus@gmail.com. Yes, all the words are spelt out. You can find my podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spreaker, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and Audible. I'm also waiting for approval to be on Castbox and Google Podcasts. So look for that in the near future, hopefully. All fingers crossed. If you guys enjoyed this, please like me, follow me. Let's get this thing going. Share me with your friends. I love it. I appreciate everyone's attention, and I hope you guys enjoyed it. I'm Courtney Lorraine, bringing you the old news. Bye.